That, no. With that, we're sticking with the agriculture theme for our next panel discussion and some of the most pressing issues impacting the agriculture community and what we can expect for the upcoming legislative session. Here to introduce the panelists and moderate this panel is Action 22 Executive Director, Sarah Blackhurst.
She's going to change the battery really quick, so I'm going to talk really loud, and I'm sorry about that. So there you go. Oh. Thanks, Christian. So one of the things that we talk about consistently that we would like to see happen is really productive, thoughtful conversation, thoughtful dialogue, and how as a society we have gotten away from that. With that in mind, I have set up this panel just a little bit differently than some of the other panels that we've done today. So what I'm doing is we have asked some of the top ag leaders in the state to have a conversation with each other, and you guys get to listen in on it. So that's how we're going to do that. And so anything can happen with that conversation. I anticipate at any moment that Terry will stand up and Kate will jump on the table and start swinging. But short of that, she's not planning on it. So I want to introduce, for those of you who don't know this panel, I'm going to start with Terry here. Terry knows a little something about cattle, and cattlemen's is all the cattlemen in the state. He's done tremendous work. You heard a lot from him after the whole, we'll call it the meat in out incident earlier this summer. Nick is the head of the corn growers, yes? The Corn Growers Administrative Committee. We've known Nick for a really long time. He, of course, has been active. He was once here at the Denver Metro Chamber, and now he's the big boss with the farm growers. Austin Vincent is here with Colorado Farm Bureau. I'm not at all a fan of the Farm Bureau. Like, I never talked to them or anything like that. So I've never hung out with any of them before. So Austin is completely new. No, Austin is new, and he's doing the legislative stuff. So he's at the Capitol here constantly working on behalf of the ag community. And of course, Kate Greenberg, who's become a really good friend of all of us. She came in and it was a really big job that she was handed. And she has done some amazing and really wonderful things with it since then. And so we're really happy to have these ag leaders with us to have this discussion. So here's what we're going to talk about today. And here's the question. This is obnoxious. I don't know why it keeps cutting in and out. So the discussion that we want to have today is with ag being the number 2 industry in Colorado, and a lot of fights really happening with the ag has to put up their dukes on a pretty regular basis. What does the future of ag look like from where you guys are sitting? So there's a whole lot that keeps coming down. There's a whole lot that's happening. There's money that is out there. There's support that's out there. What does the future of ag actually look like? So Terry, I'm going to start with you, and then just go around with have a discussion.
Well, thanks. I'll try to look around the room a little bit. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to talk about agriculture. It's nobody can tell the future universally. I think what you can do is you can talk about things that make the future more optimistic. You can define the path and move forward. We can't control a lot of these things that come by the way of agriculture. I mean, weather, markets, things along those lines are really hard to control, and they're profitability issues. But there's also things that hit the bottom line of agriculture as well as the top line that I think we can work on. Colorado's got a vibrant ag economy. and it could actually grow, and it could grow in a lot of different sectors in a lot of different ways, or it could shrink pretty easily as well. And I think a lot of that depends on agriculture, but a lot of it also depends on an adage that I was once told that didn't understand for some time, but learned fairly quickly. Money travels where it's treated well, right? So one of the things that I think has been interesting is perception also becomes reality. And there is a perception that agriculture is more challenged in Colorado than other states. It's a reality. If we deny that that's a reality, I think that we're not being honest with ourselves. And part of that's things like drought. Part of that are things like highly urbanization. Part of that's new regulations. Part of that is it's something that we've talked to with one of the world's largest banks, and I talked to about producers. I mean, I think it's interesting when one of the world's largest banks won't loan money to anybody under $50 million on a note in Colorado, because they've decided Colorado is a risk at some level. And those are the things that bother me and keep us awake at night, and also grows my out-of-state membership. So we need to fix that, and we need to learn from that. And if there are things that we can do and touch, I think the future is very bright for agriculture in Colorado, but I don't think any of that opportunity or challenge goes unchaperoned. So it's going to take everybody being active to ensure the future of Colorado agriculture. There'll always be agriculture. The question is Colorado the place where money travels to agriculture, or does it travel to another state? And do our producers follow it? I hope not. I'm optimistic that they will. So that's my introduction on that.
So I'm going to go this way. Austin, what do you think?
Well, to kind of build off of what Terry was talking about, a lot of change has happened in Colorado, especially when I was young growing up near the southeastern corner of Colorado, near the small town of Branson. A lot has changed in Colorado, but one thing that agriculture is known for is adapting to change. From the Great Depression time on through, while agriculture looks a lot the same, there has also been a lot of change as well, whether that's technology, whether that's procedures, whether that's how we run our operations. Agriculture is it adapts when it needs to, but it also adapts with a little better when it has some support. And that is one thing recently that has been difficult in the state, is getting support. While there are definitely some changes that were needed, also there were a lot of changes that were very detrimental to the ag industry. And looking forward, understanding how we're going to adapt and ensure that the agriculture industry here in Colorado remains strong, and we don't lose people to other states around us that might seem a little more ag-friendly, but ensuring that our industry here is strong. And with the changes here in Colorado, a lot of the changes have been urbanization and a population that doesn't understand agriculture, which unfortunately it's hard to understand agriculture if you're not in it and not grown in it. But there are opportunities to learn and also opportunities to teach. And I think it's not only the differences in agriculture that we need to help bridge, but also the similarities in agriculture and rural areas. I mean, all of us, at least most of us in here, either live in rural areas or grew up in rural areas, and understanding the similarities between poverty in rural areas and agriculture compared to poverty in towns, big towns, low income, as well as accessibilities, and quite frankly, in rural areas, and especially in agriculture, accessibility to healthcare, accessibility to groceries, accessibility to financing. There's a lot of similarities with nuanced differences, though, but a lot of similarities up high that we can address these issues and understand each other, and at least find some common ground that allow us in the future to push forward with understanding in places that we have differences in. And I think that's one thing, is working with our urban friends to understand our lives would be incredibly helpful for and very important for the future of agriculture in Colorado.
my uncle about 40 some years ago started his ranch operation in Bayfield and left Bayfield because it was getting too busy. You can imagine that. You think about that now, a few decades later. That's my neck of the woods, Southwest Colorado. And just to Austin's point about how fast the state is changing population-wise, I think all of us experienced that one way or another in the last 2 years, have accelerated that. With that, there's of course been a lot of change, a lot of flux, a lot of uncertainty in recent years in particular. And I think that certainly in a lot of rural places and in ag, there's a lot of angst that comes with that because there's a lot of unknown. Where is this going to lead us? Who's going to be on our team? And what does the future look like, to Sarah's question? So, with that, I think maybe because I'm sort of an optimist by default, I think there is opportunity here. It's not without risk because we can't see the future. But I think the opportunities that we're seeing are really, that some of it's been touched on. The words urban-rural divide are something that we kind of default to. But I think that folks are more nuanced than that. And I have hope that as we urbanize and as our towns and cities grow, that more and more people will find a connection point to agriculture. And, whether that's through food or through stewardship or through the love of animals or land or open space or the work of agriculture or, the food access and food security that comes when we produce food in our own state. There's so many different access points to fall in love with agriculture. And I think that's a real opportunity for us as a sector and as one of the driving economies in the state is to recognize what we share and how we build that sense of relationship. So that's where we're really focused at the Department of Ag. How can we make sure that we're at anywhere you might be starting from with your relationship to agriculture? How can you fall in love with it, become engaged with it, understand it, have nuanced conversations around it? And I think part of that is going to set us up for the future. Now, it is going to look different. I mean, we are facing challenges we haven't faced before. We've got persistent drought. We've got, of course, lots of states that we are beholden to, and a lot of water to make sure we protect for our own uses here in Colorado. We've got groundwater-dependent basins that have very tight timelines for aquifer sustainability and recovery. It's going to impact irrigated ag and, of course, other aspects of the economy. That doesn't mean it's all or nothing, that it's ag or no ag. And that's where at CDA we're really focused on how can we meet these challenges in a way that preserves agriculture for the future. It might look different. Maybe it's along the lines of agrivoltaic production that we have been charged by the legislature to invest in, where maybe you're looking at reducing consumptive use on irrigated ground, but you're going to keep that land in production and have stacked revenue streams on the same acreage with photovoltaic production with rotational grazing underneath. That's just one model that would preserve agriculture while meeting some of the other demands that the state faces. So I think thinking, not all or nothing, thinking about how we adapt, thinking about how we take the realities that we're up against and turn them into opportunities for agriculture is going to determine kind of what Terry mentioned, the ability of our state to be the state for agriculture and to be the place where the economy, dollars, the opportunities, the communities flow and thrive because we've had the ability to imagine that kind of future.
All right. So the future of agriculture in Colorado. I'm going to fall back on my natural optimistic tendency as a past farmer. You have to be optimistic to be a farmer because there's always next year, right? But I think the future is very bright for Colorado ag. And here's some of the things that I really look at. Is I look at global demand. We look at a growing middle class in China, in Southeast Asia areas, and in Africa. And we see 90+% of our consumers outside of the United States. And as we see that middle class grow, that means that their standard of living increases. That means that the demand for proteins and higher desirable goods goes up as well. And who's best suited to supply that? Agriculturalists, farmers, ranchers right here in the United States and Colorado. There's also an incredible movement towards sustainability. And I'll get into more details. I think we're going to break this topic up later, Sarah. If not, when points not, I figured you got this topic for you. There's incredible movement towards sustainability on a global scale. And agriculture has been ahead of its time when it comes to being sustainable and increasing its environmental metrics. And we're going to be the ones that beat that. And so there's an incredible opportunity for agriculture to take a hold of and take an advantage of a movement right now that is totally and entirely suited to it, and latch onto that and reap the reward of what are we, not of what have we done, but what we can still do in the future. And so I see this as a very bright opportunity for Colorado, not just here in Colorado, but across the nation. But I don't think that comes without any challenge. We see, you mentioned the urban-rural divide, you mentioned, money flows to where it's treated well. We have some of these issues that we still need to address. That doesn't mean that that we take these challenges and brush them off because we see these opportunities. It still means that the Department of Ag, Farm Bureau, Colorado Farm Administrative Committee need to work towards advocating for our members, advocating for more production research, advocating for more markets for our crops and for our produce, because that's what it's going to take, meeting these challenges head on, and sometimes facing some uncomfortable truths of what it means to tackle these in a real and holistic way. And so I really like to just leave you with, there's a bright future out there for agriculture, and we're just going to have to take these challenges one-on-one as we face them. But I really do want to be sure that we make sure we look at the big picture, that there is something in the optimistic view that is going for everyone going forward.
So sustainability is going to be one of those things that's one of those words we like to throw around a lot. And when we talk about sustainability, I think there are view that it's mutually exclusive. So let's start by trying to say what sustainability actually means or looks like in the ag space. So Kate, I'm going to start with you. What does sustainability mean?
Well, it's an ongoing, I think, question that you asked, Sarah. We've been thinking a lot about resilience when it comes to sort of this realm of question. I think sustainability certainly has a role. It has a lot of different interpretations and definitions, but resilience is, the ability to bounce back and potentially look a little different than before when you started, but to continue driving forward in a way that, preserves sort of the heart and soul of the thing that you're doing in agriculture. And we see that across our ag community in so many ways. I mean, you just think drought is a great example. Between 2018 and 2021, 2020, and we've had just persistent drought years, and it is not an easy thing to bounce back, but we see people getting creative, thinking ahead, thinking about how to adapt. We've got new support coming up. Drought advisors is something that came out of our Ag Impact Task Force that we've co-hosted. Terry, Nick, Farm Bureau have all been on it the last, year and a half since we've been activated, just added to the list of standing meetings that we all get to be on. But what's come out of that is that, this is going to be with us. How do we adapt? How do we support each other? So that resilience piece has been really, really big. At CDA, we are very focused on voluntary incentivized stewardship. We think about that as soil, water, and climate stewardship. So that is everything from our soil health program that we've been building, again, with a lot of the same folks at this table and others, to provide resources, technical assistance, research, and grant dollars to producers and associations to advance the work of soil health as a tool for water conservation, for reducing off-farm inputs, potential for carbon sequestration, and then the potential to connect that stewardship to market value and actually show companies across the supply chain that Colorado is a place where they are going to help, they're going to find producers who are going to help them meet their climate targets and other sustainability targets across their supply chain. That's our vision. And so you've got this connection between stewardship and market opportunity for our producers, where you've got additional diversified revenue streams, not solely based on yield, but based on practice, based on how you're taking care of the land. And then, lastly, and I think we talk about this a lot, but, resilience, sustainability over time too, and how can we make sure that we are supporting agriculture well into the future. We have an incredible history of perseverance. I think a lot of sustainability is about perseverance. It's not always about getting it right. It's about trying something and constantly improving. But that means we've got to have a strong economy for our ag producers and ag businesses to be able to thrive in Colorado. Strong communities that support agricultural production and ag business, and that adaptation component as well is key, because sustainability is not constant, and our world is changing quickly, and we've got to change with it.
So I'll stick to the adaptability kind of topic that I started out with, and the fact that yes, agriculture is well known to having a history of adapting, whether that is by forced pressures or by natural pressures. And that's one of the great things about agriculture is it's continuously changing, continuously innovating, and continuously finding new technologies, whether that's your typical technology as a machine or your genetic technologies that we can continuously improve and build upon. So with our updated practices in agriculture, especially livestock agriculture, we're able to produce more beef than ever before with less cattle, with less cattle. And that's through practices. That is through better feeding procedures, through animal welfare, and ensuring that stress as well as comfort is addressed, and ensure that they are able to grow and thrive as best as they can. This also continues on into the crop industry, where you have genetically modified seeds that allow for less inputs, less water. Also more research into microbial health in soils, as well as getting rid of bad microbes in soils to ensure that plants have the best ability to grow as best as they can, again, with less resources. We have continuously, since the 1970s, produced more and more with less and less, and we will continue most likely to do that. And in the state where water is king and water is on everyone's mind, that is also going to be a continued research topic as well, as to see what we can do to better use our water, to better conserve our water. And I think that's not lost on either the private industry or in agriculture generally, because we know that we need these resources to continue to thrive and continue to exist. And I think that sustainability here in Colorado especially, because we have support for finding sustainable ways, but agriculture in the U.S. generally as well. Nick was saying how well we are positioned in the U.S. with all of our capabilities and our knowledge that will continue as we better understand the science, better understand or better develop these technologies to make the American agriculture and Colorado agriculture that much more productive, as well as that much more competitive in this world. And I really do think that we are on track or trajectory to doing that. I mean, comparing ourselves to a lot of other places in the world, we do produce our food, whether that's crops or animals, much cleaner, much more concise, with a quality that outpaces a lot of places. And so that is the shining light of American agriculture, is not only innovation, but innovation and quality, and the affordability that we're able to still provide all this to not only our citizens, but citizens across the world affordably, and give them the nutrition that they need. So pass it on to you.
So the beef industry's invested a lot of resources into sustainability, and we've done 2 life cycle analysis. We've done Colorado is one of the areas where we created a focal point on and have a lot of data. The one thing sustainability is interesting. It's a term that, yeah, it does have a lot of different, it's a term that you understand and you know, but everybody seems to ask the definition of at the same time. So it can have different meanings and connotations. And I think the reason it does is because it's really a question of accountability, and not one of accountability in relation to are you sustainable or not. It's accountability to how you use the terminology and what your inferences are. Doing more with less has been a continuum based on economies and necessity throughout agriculture's history. And I'd argue probably for most businesses. Anybody that runs a small business understands that, right up to a large business. Sustainability is important, but it's also important to to have it be intellectually honest, because it's something that consumers generally can be confused by and are often misled by. And that's where I go back to the accountability piece. In every conversation around sustainability, we have to be accountable to what we say and what we do and what we mean. And that's not happening. I'll just be honest, that's not happening. There's a lot of phraseology, there's a lot of metrics, there's a lot of implementation that really doesn't result in a more sustainably produced product or system within the environment. But it sells memberships or it gets government grants, and that's a reality. I'm not trying to be derogatory in that content. I'm being real about that. And the system that we have to do is we quickly move from sustainability. We start to talk about environmental coefficients. And that's where accountability also comes in, is that we have to use data that's accurate, and we can't use misinformation. So let me use the beef industry as an example. This took place from Colorado to COP23. I mean, it's the inaccurate use of information. EPA has probably measured for the longest time the most consistent environmental attributes around the climate, being carbon, being methane, being CO2, and things along those lines. They've consistently reported that domestic agriculture is but a fraction of those pollutants. Yet we often don't see data sets use that information. And in fact, Colorado hasn't used that information. They use international data. And internationally, Colorado and the United States produces products very differently than they do in Brazil, very differently than they do in Africa, very different than they do in Europe. And in often cases more efficiently. And a lot of that has to do with technological advancements and just different ways of doing things. But if we can't be accountable to the information that exists and implement it in a meaningful way, we start to get this irreverence toward what sustainability really means. So I'll tell you a quick story. A large box store at one point in time, during some of their basically internal processes to be more accountable to the environment, began to carry more environmentally oriented, supposedly, products within their store. And they were self-branded products, and those products were in a clear bottle with green label. And the product within the bottle was clear, and they were labeled as such. They were better for the environment. It just so happens they were the same products that were always on the shelf in a different bottle at one point in time that had been indicated as being not good for the environment. And that started this whole notion around greenwashing. And that cost, hundreds of millions of dollars to that company for misleading consumers. Consumers aren't stupid. It may take a different amount of time to get toward the answer to if a claim around sustainability is accurate or not. And I think agriculture probably knows that fairly well and is taking this discussion fairly seriously. But for the beef industry specifically, you pick up. I followed fairly closely the climate talks that existed here recently, and it was all about eliminating beef production or agriculture in order to help the environment. Not accountable, not meaningful. Furthermore, not sustainable for the planet or the people that live on it, right? So we've got to get past some of these agenda-oriented discussions and get to the really factual, fundamental, accurate information as we move forward. Otherwise, we're not going to be successful as a population of people in being able to sustain ourselves. And that, the last notion I would make on accountability is that comes back to all of us. And we have to be accurate in the information and the angle that we use when we talk about businesses and systems. And if we're not, my guess is we end up being like that bottle of clear solution on that big box store's wall. We become a story that people tell about what not.
So I'll start mine off with a question. Who here has shopped at Walmart? That's a lot less hands than I thought it would go up. So next question. Who here equates Walmart with sustainability? Now that was much more of what I thought it would be, but you would be surprised that that is where they're headed. And that's why I think this is so important to agriculture. Just recently, Walmart put out a sustainability statement, and in that was sustainability statement on row crops. That caught my attention because that's who my guys are and gals, is the people who are farming this row crop. And I'm sure they have beef, pork, or fruits and vegetables as well. But they are headed in this direction. They are the world's largest retailer. They sell the most stuff out of anyone on the planet. And so that should give us all a pause in agriculture of what do we do? Because we're already seeing it. They've already approached Coors Brewing Company and said, we need your producers to be more sustainable. And what that means to us is they need to use less water. They need to use less nutrients when they grow their barley, or else we can find somebody else who will. So we are seeing those people who ultimately sell the end products want more sustainable products for their end users so that they can meet their own sustainability metrics. And my thought is, if they're going to do that to beer, why would they not do that to pork? Why would they not do that? Why would they not do that to us in corn? And so we are seeing this movement towards sustainability go in a very quick direction in the corporate world, where I don't think we've seen it head before. We've heard the buzzwords, we've heard people talk about the sustainable movement, but we've never seen corporate, boards and corporate businesses take it in the level that they have now. And that really, directs me to one thing, and that is we as organizations like Colorado Corn Administrative Committee, like the Farm Bureau, like the Cattlemen's, like Colorado Livestock Association, and our Department of Ag need to be at the table, or else we're going to be on the menu. And that means that we have to sit there and we have to go through and we have to look at what are they looking to do? And is that sustainability goal that they want to put out there achievable? Because there is, pretty much a universal, what I think is a universal definition of sustainability. You Google it, anything with a decent reputation comes back 3 pillars of sustainability: economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and societal. Anything that you do that doesn't meet one of those 3 metrics causes that stool to collapse. So if you can't make profit with a sustainable practice, it doesn't work. If it doesn't provide an environmental benefit, what's the point? And if there's no societal benefit to it, there's no point, it falls on its face as well. And so that is where our organizations, that's where the Department of Ag really need to be at the table, whether it be with the corporation, whether it be with non-government or non-governmental organizations, to really be there to set that definition and help drive that conversation of what is possible, what can we do, and what have we already done? Are we meeting those metrics? That's what I wanted to kind of just hit on really quick is we've actually got the data in corn, and just like Terry does in beef, and there's other ag industries that are out there. But since 1980 to 2016, so in those 36 years, we saw a reduction in we saw some really positive movement. And we reduced soil loss by 58% per acre. We decreased the amount of land required to produce a bushel of corn by 41%. We improved the energy use efficiency by 41%. And we even reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 31% per bushel. So we are moving we've moved in a positive direction when it comes to the sustainability conversation. And those should be taken into account. We should be given credit for that. And that's why we need to be at the table. And there's actually a really good organization called Farm to Market. I think the Department of Ag has a representative that sits on there. I know NCPA and Farm Bureau does as well. I know Cattlemen's or National Cattlemen's do. But this is where a lot of our companies and our agricultural organizations come together to sit down and say, how can we meet these goals? How can we produce sustainable products? And I really look at it through the lens of corn. Corn is a very foundational ingredient. It is in a lot of things that you don't know. It's in your car, not just in your gas tank, but in a lot of the components, whether they're plastic components, it's in your cosmetics, it's in your pharmaceuticals, it's in your refrigerator, whether it be cornstarch or the sweet corn that you buy from the label sweet corn. It is in everywhere that you're at. And it's also a very foundational ingredient in the very tasty beef, pork, chicken, and eggs that we all eat as well. And if we cannot be a sustainable product as the foundational ingredient in so many things, how do they then move towards that next product being sustainable? How do we make beef more sustainable? How do we make pork more sustainable if we can't start that way? So I really see this as a conversation that we need to keep in the market, setting these parameters, setting these metrics, keep it out of the policy arena, because that, in my opinion, stifles the innovation, stifles the progress that we can make, and really just sets barriers instead of goals. And so really, we just need, as an agricultural industry, to really embrace this and take it so that we can so that we can take advantage of the opportunity that's being presented, but also sit at the table to help drive it in a direction that we can make a profit and we can be sustainable as well.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want to put a finer point on also what we've also discussed, and ensuring that we frame sustainability with the three pillars that Nick just said: economics, environment, and societal. Because you've heard us all four talk about we've created more with less. And while sustainability does have a part of the discussion incorporated in it, we're using less and making more. And since the 1970s, we have been able to use less and make more. But it's also important to remember that there is a natural resource economics curve in that you can use too much, but you can also use too little, and you lose a lot of the benefits that you have, or that we currently have. If we do get to a point where we're forced to use too little, unable to make enough, and that becomes the economic problem, where while we are using less and we're being more conservative in whether that's nutrients, water, or any other input. If we aren't able to make a profit on that, then we start wobbling on the not only societal but economic side. Because if you don't have a farmer or rancher on the land, who's going to ensure that that land is healthy and managed? Because agriculture is stewardship. Agriculturalists are the stewards of the land. Ranchers and farmers know how to manage the land, and if there's nobody on there, there's no one that's going to have the cattle or the sheep that are going to use the grass that is unable to be used for much else, but they are able to eat that, create another product that we as people and we as the world can use. We have farmers that know how to manage their ground in order to keep it as healthy as possible. That also allows for wildlife to use their land. Also puts water in the land whenever they're able to use that water smartly and ensure that it's not wasted. So I think whenever we frame this sustainability, it's not only about conserving and not only about using less. It is about the three pillars and ensuring those three pillars are healthy. Because again, going back to not having farmers and ranchers on the land, that means that there's less production from the land, less local production from food. And as Kate was talking about, local production is a good thing and a necessary thing. But it would not only harm the farmer, but also harm society. You start losing benefits and having more cons whenever you get to a point where, like Nick said, the stool gets wobbly when one of those pillars is not healthy or is not functioning correct. So just going forward, I think it's important to talk about sustainability in that frame, not just in one.
Okay, so final question to all of you. And I own that I am irrationally in love with the ag community and anybody supports them. So with that level of affection, I get a little protective. And so it feels like there are, every day it's a new hits from some place else on our ag community. So in 60 seconds to wrap it up, help me feel better about that.
Yeah, go ahead. No, sure. Yep. Okay. I'll take a stab at it. So, I don't know that agriculture should have an entitlement to survive, but it deserves a chance to survive. Okay, and I think that isn't everyone's job, but it really is if you think deeply enough. Ag's not any more special than anything else that we need, except that it's one of the three things we need in life, especially within about, I think it's the 3-day interval piece or some 3-hour interval, 3 hour, 3 day, 3 week, or something along those lines. You die from exposure in three hours, either you die from water 3 days, and maybe it's 3 weeks or something like that for food. But the one thing I think we do owe to ourselves and others, and I don't think there's necessarily this rural-urban divide, and the meat in, meat out piece proved that, because I think Colorado has an inherent ability to call bullshit on things, and it did. Okay. And I think that's why I like this state a lot. It's sort of that independence, sort of that Western way, and it doesn't matter where you live, that exists. But what is important for people, and what is important for agriculture, I think, and I really believe this is that we take very seriously our roles. If our roles are to advocate, if our roles are to fact check, if our roles are to ensure good governance, then we in fact do those things. Whether you're a county commissioner, whether you work for an organization, whether you're in Kate's position, whether you're in the governor's position, or if you're a foodie that's interested in what they eat. I think it's really important that you become part of the process and you advocate for right and wrong. And I think the only time Colorado really has a problem is when there's this sense of opportunity, not opportunity for agriculture or anything else that you can replace with that now, but an opportunity for those that are bent on nonsense to be given permission to come into this state and use processes and procedures and to use out-of-state dollars and to use people in a way that begets outcomes that are not good for this state. When I moved here 22 years ago, it was indoctrinated into me that there's a Colorado way. And I think we've gotten away from that. And I think we've forgotten some of that. And it is fine that people move to this state. And you're not going to stop it. In fact, you'll fight to defend their right to do so. But with that, we owe it to the people that have lived here and do make business here to ensure that they understand what's important to the continuation of the success, the health, and the values of Colorado. Because if you choose not to do that, or you choose to mislead people, then I think I don't have an answer for you. But if we continue to do that and fight for this state and fight for what it stands for, we'll be fine. So I think I'll go back to my prior statements about accountability. We need to all be held accountable if we choose to live.
I think that's the $64,000 question, Sarah, is, what do we do? And a lot of it is, we've mentioned the urban-rural divide a couple times. And, one of the biggest things is, how do you bridge that gap? And a lot of it I go back to is, I was always told it's hard to really know someone or know what they experience unless you walk a mile away. And that goes for everyone. It goes for those who are in the suburban, urban areas, do not live in rural parts of Colorado, do not participate in agriculture. How do we give our shared experience to them? But also, how do we get their shared experience to us so that we understand the daily struggles, the daily grind that they go through to get to what they want and achieve in their lives? Because I really believe at the end of the day, we all want similar goals. We want to have our families safe and healthy. We want our communities to thrive, and we want our kids to end up better than we were in the end. And so, what is it that we do with each other to have those shared experiences? And I think when we see those opportunities, we've got to take those, because that's what's really going to bridge that divide, to develop more understanding of what we do to benefit each other. Because there is a symbiotic relationship between everybody here in the state, whether it be what we're doing here in downtown Metro Denver, the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, or what Club 20 or Action 15, Action 22 or Pro 15 are doing. Running through, and my mouth doesn't work as fast as my brain. What are we doing here to bridge those gaps, to tell our stories, to share our experiences, so that we can develop a better understanding? Because I believe what Terry is talking about, when those extreme ideas and those very out there concepts come, they're not what the vast majority of Coloradans really believe and feel. You know, when we were looking at the Pause Act, I don't believe the vast majority of Coloradans would have went with that. And it just takes us hearing those stories, but it does put their processes that allow those very extreme, very far out there views to come to light. And I believe that the more experiences we have together, and that's where organizations like Farm Bureau, Cattleman, I mentioned this all the time, Colorado Farm, Department of Ag, and all the others, you know, like Pro 15, Action 22, and Club 20 are out there to help share those stories, to help bridge those gaps between our two rural and urban divides. So, you know, I really want to kind of just leave us with that, is that we need to find ways to share our experiences, share our stories, and, you know, walk a mile on each other's feet.
All right, Kate, 60 seconds, Kate, make me feel better.
So Sarah, I think part of what I've been thinking about is how many people I know who have a, as you put it, just an inexplicable passion or love of agriculture. And, you know, I think we come from all sorts of walks of life. I wasn't raised on a farm or ranch. I was raised part-time in the country in southern Minnesota and part-time a mile from downtown Minneapolis. And I think both of those experiences contribute to my love of agriculture. And I would imagine every single person in this room has a life story that is not monolithic, and nobody can replicate that life story. And I think in the 5.7 million Coloradans, that is also true, and the others moving in here. And so when you think about that, we've all got something, some way to connect us to ag, connect us to our landscape. You know, we talk a lot about not just production value, but beauty, and the beauty of Colorado and why people move here, and the interconnection between our high country and public lands and our lower, you know, country private lands, and how all of that is connected and intertwined through water, through food, through landscape, through wildlife habitat, through the things that we love and the reasons that a lot of us move here, live here, stay here. So I think, you know, what keeps me going, and hopefully will give you some heart, Sarah, is a lot of inexplicable passion and love all across the state.
Thank you, Kate. Austin.
I think in looking to our future, it's important to look at our past. My family migrated in the 1860s to Johnson Mesa, which is on the New Mexico-Colorado border. The Dales and Morrows were both agriculturalists, and to this day, 160 years later, there are still Morrows, Owens, Bees, and Vincents that have ranches and work in agriculture there. And that's going through the Great Depression, where agriculture was decimated, when my great-grandfather luckily was able to partake in the government program that unfortunately required him, as well as other ranchers throughout the entire nation, to slaughter their livestock, because there was an animal welfare problem, that they did not have water, they did not have food. But they got out of that. The ranch continued to ranch and further has prospered. Growing up 45 miles from the epicenter of the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl in Clayton, New Mexico, and still having a ranch nearly 100 years later, shows agriculture and agriculturalists will continue to persevere, getting through and being able, agriculture generally being able to thrive and prosper through enhanced regulation, when it came to environmental regulations, surviving the 80s downturn in the economy. Agriculture and agriculturalists have had trials and tribulations that we have always overcome, and we have always discovered and figured out how to continue our way of life and make others' lives better. And so that gives me hope in the future of not only me, but all of us around this table, and on all the agriculturalists today. We will figure out and we will solve the problems that we are experiencing today, and continue our agricultural way of life for the next generation not only benefiting our families and those around us, but also benefiting the world. So that gives me hope in knowing that while we will have trials, we will have tribulations, and we'll have plenty of struggles, we will be able to make it through.
Aren't we so glad that these are our ag leaders for our state? Can you help give them a hand?